Dylan from Throttle Company in Columbus, Ohio, and today we're talking about this 1972 Norton Commando Combat.
Mecum.
All right, so this motorcycle is from our friends at Baxter Cycles. You can see they've got their sticker on it here, and they work on these bikes, they sell these bikes, they know these bikes. What's interesting about a Combat is at the time, it was for the performance. So it had a different camshaft and it had higher compression. Those things require machine work. They didn't quite get it right in the beginning. So a lot of these Combat engines failed. And it's a known thing. It's interesting because they're high performance. Those are usually the ones people want more. In this case, it adds an extra level of rarity because they didn't survive. So you have a list of the work done, and this is great when people do this. And of course, Baxter, they're professionals. Shout out to them if they're listening and they don't think if they don't believe I think they're the greatest. But you've got a lot of this stuff going on here, and they had done a bunch of work. So they did main bearings and stuff like that. So they have addressed the exact things that if you were buying a Combat that you would be worried about and might ease your mind. You know this bike runs, the keys are in it. They just sort of wear their integrity on their sleeve. And this is, if you're gonna if you're in the market for this bike, this is like such a perfect example of that. What makes this cool is Nortons are cool. I mean, you can see it by looking at it. It's long, it's British, it's very British. And I say that obviously it's British, but it's right side shift, it's kick only. Norton only went to electric start in 1975, which is the last year. So kick only. You have right side shift. You do have a little bit of a gear indicator. This is something I always think is cool. Imagine though, going down the road, you see right now it's in neutral obviously. First, second, third, fourth, only 4 speeds. But imagine driving down the road trying to see that tiny little gear indicator down there. But it exists, and at least it helps when you're working on it. You're in the shop saying, what gear am I in? This is pre-unit, not that there ever was unit, but pre-unit construction. So the engine and the transmission are separate. It's interesting because they're joined by the primary here. There's a chain in here, standard. A lot of people replace it sometimes with a belt drive and things like that. Belt drive primary was what they would call it. But you can see the transmission on the other side. So engine here, transmission separate. They're joined together by the primary. If you're going to do any work on here and you need to adjust the chain, sometimes eventually you'll need to move the transmission back. Well, okay, the chain comes from the transmission. Now we have to adjust all those things and get it into balance. It's a little bit tougher to work on. But once you know what you're doing, it's very rewarding. That's what's cool about a British bike. My friend, who owns a bunch of them, always says, the bike needs you. And that's what's interesting about this is, this bike can't start on its own. It needs my leg. It needs my leg power. It needs some knowledge, some thinking. You gotta tickle the carbs, you have to know the sequence, you gotta put on the choke. We have to know how to get this bike to even do its thing. It needs me. It needs kind of a competent rider. That's what's fun and that's what's rewarding about a British bike, especially a British bike of this era. But you can just look at it and see the classy details, these gauges. Just for 1972, that's nostalgia, that's classic. Norton, a little bit earlier than other people, started adding on these turn signals. So you do have turn signals, you do have these controls. These are all correct, of course it's correct. But you get these kind of blockier controls. It's funny because they use these controls, this is Lucas controls. They use these controls on a bunch of different bikes, so nothing's labeled because this would be on a Triumph as well and stuff. So every time I work on one of these, I have to figure out where's the turn signal, where's the horn, and I push the horn on accident, stuff like that. So that makes it fun. That's part of the fun of owning a British bike. These are great. This one in particular is a really nice example, especially if you kind of don't know what you're doing. Baxter look for that sticker, and it's like a hack for becoming an expert. Say, I just think I'm interested in the Baxter one. You really can't go wrong. You can't get burned. You could pay too much because other people are going to be interested in that name as well, but you're not going to make some bonehead move buying a bike from them. And those guys are great guys. You could always call them and say, hey, I bought this bike from you. Tell me about it. So this is one I really like to see at the show.
Anybody else?
Mecum.
And now 4,000, you're going to get 5,000, you're going to get 6,000, you're going to get 5, 6.